So while I'm editing these portraits from a recent shoot, I figured I'd roughly show you how I edit my portrait photography, particularly night portrait photography on Adobe Lightroom, with a couple of examples. Starting with this one, I've reset the edits. Now I've made a couple of presets for particularly portraits, particularly night portraits, going for this kind of filmic style. These presets are pretty exaggerated. They're designed to basically give me some ideas on finding the editing direction. They're not designed to be something you just slap on and be done with it. Just kind of extreme ideas for the direction that I want to go. I also got a couple of other portrait specific presets, particularly night portrait specific, by the way. If you put these on a daytime photo or a regularly lit photo, it's gonna look absolutely ridiculous. And I really like a more retro look. I shot this on the Helios 44 vintage lens. It has kind of vintagey tones because of that. You can get these presets on my website, by the way. And for this edit, we're pretty good with the Filmic Port 5. I'm gonna explain what the preset did in a minute. I'm just gonna tone down just a little bit. So this makes it like less exaggerated. And I think the curve is probably the biggest thing. Pulling this thing up a little bit messes with the shadows in a more filmic way, and then sometimes I like to pull down the highlights again to emulate a kind of a flatter dynamic range that is present in film shooting. And I like my reds to be red, especially here. They create a nice contrast, so just exaggerating those just a little bit more. Temperature's already pretty cold. It creates a nice color contrast while keeping the skin tones somewhat believable. I'm using a street lamp to light her face. You can't see it, but it's behind somewhere. And you can see the preset did a little bit of shadow coloring here. If you reset it, here's roughly the difference. Vignette, tiny bit of dehaze down to create a mistier look. A little bit of grain because we're going for a filmic style, finer grain. That's about it. See the before and after. Let's move on to the second example I wanted to show you. So this one, same start. I'm going to my presets. Obviously you should probably save your own presets as well to make the process easier and simpler. Again, the fifth one is pretty good, but it's a little strong for my liking, so just tone it down a tiny bit. One nice trick is if you use a LED light that is red, you can get away with changing the color temperature a lot more, because now you don't have to worry about skin tones. And again, the red does a lot of stuff here. If her face is underexposed, you can increase the luminance just to expose it very easily without even any kind of, what do they call them, spot edits. So on this one, we did not have any kind of a lighting on her face. You can see how dark this image is, even if we bring it up. So we are pasting the previous edits, and the image is very dark and kind of too faded, fixing the blacks a little bit. And we could just bring up the exposure, but then everything else blows up. So for portraits, it's very useful to use a radial gradient on the model's face and just bring out the exposure on that part, only bringing the focus to her face. Just highlights also is a good thing, and even whites to increase on a spot edit to bring the focus to her eyes. It's actually maybe a tiny bit out of focus, so you could even get away with a little bit of clarity, which I normally would never recommend. And we get a pretty good before and after with all of the same edits. If you want to see the behind the scenes on how I actually shot this, check out my main channel. And if you want to get my portrait presets, they are available on my website. Just be mindful they only work for nighttime portrait photography with a very specific lighting scenario, but I find them very useful to give me some directions on the editing style. Saves me a lot of time. Hopefully that was somewhat helpful. Cheers.